Hello, everyone, and welcome to 3GNY Stories Live, WEDU Wednesday. I'm Dave Wax, 3GNY president and grandchild of two Holocaust survivors. I'm thrilled to be here for our 9th WEDU Wednesday featuring guest speaker Elizabeth Kamens, who has a fascinating story to share. 3GNY is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren of survivors and our supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and the lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. Founded in 2005 with a group of 6, 3GNY's membership now exceeds 3,000. Over these past 15 years, we've held diverse in-person programs of all sizes around the New York area. 3GNY has also played a leading role in launching other 3G groups, including 3GDC and 3GNJ. And we're in conversations with others around the country to hopefully help in launching more. In July, we held our first WEDU Wednesday and have had them every 2 weeks ever since. All of these programs are recorded and are hosted on our YouTube channel. So we're also building an archive of our stories, which keeps them alive and increases their exposure. WEDU Wednesdays showcase 3GNY's flagship education program, WEDU, which is short for We Educate. This initiative empowers grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their families' Holocaust experiences in school classrooms and with community groups. We've all seen the heartbreaking studies stating the lack of Holocaust knowledge among recent high school and college graduates. The good news is that students who do receive Holocaust education are more tolerant and comfortable with people of different races and backgrounds. They are more willing to challenge incorrect or biased information and are more likely to be upstanders. This is why WEDU is so critical today. It's a 4-week training program to teach grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their family testimony in school classrooms. 3GNY has trained over 250 speakers in New York, New Jersey, DC, and most recently around the country on Zoom since the pandemic hit. Through our grandparents' testimony, we talk about the importance of stepping in early and often where small injustices are found, on the playground, in the classroom, and on the street, because it is the easiest and most efficient way to act. By the time Nazi tanks roll in, it's too late. We've reached over 25,000 young minds, and we know we need to do more. Our speakers have received over 1,000 thank you notes from students. Hope is not lost, and we need to keep doing our work. You can help us accomplish this through a financial gift of any amount. This will go directly towards training more speakers and thus reaching even more students. We do not solicit donations from schools, teachers, or students. We provide our programming to schools completely free, and we aim to keep the cost of training 3Gs as low as possible. There is a link with ways to donate in the chat, and we hope you'll consider making a gift. Thank you for helping us honor the memories of our grandparents and ensuring that never again is more than just an empty phrase. I'd now like you to meet Lindsay Kamens, Elizabeth's sister. Lindsay also went through our WEDU program and will introduce her sister to all of you.
Good evening and thank you, David. As David said, my name is Lindsay and I have the privilege of introducing my sister, Elizabeth. Thanks to Elizabeth's research and due diligence in ensuring our family's story and history is preserved, I was introduced to 3GNY. Ever the younger sister, Elizabeth was involved for a few years prior to myself. I went through the training around this time last year and was fortunate to have the opportunity to speak in person to a high school class this past winter. It was an extremely rewarding experience to speak to students on a personal level and see through their eyes the impact that our grandfather's story left on them. Tonight, Elizabeth will be sharing the story of our maternal grandfather, Rudolph Herz. This is a very timely story, given that our grandfather escaped Germany after Kristallnacht. Monday, November 9th marks the 82nd anniversary of the Night of Broken Glass. You'll hear more about it from Elizabeth later. Our grandfather was also a US Army veteran, and Veterans Day is right around the corner as well. Elizabeth became a 3GNY WEDU speaker in 2017. Our grandfather always said, at the end of the day, all you have is your character. Our grandparents' experience instilled in her an awareness about the negative effects of complacency, and the stories of survival encouraged her to pursue a job where she could help others and have an impact on society. She is committed to pursuing justice through the course of her work. Elizabeth graduated from the George Washington University with a degree in political communication and holds a JD from Drexel University School of Law. She serves as an assistant district attorney in Bronx County, New York City, where she is in the trial division and handles serious violent felony cases. Elizabeth's passion for giving back and helping others is evident through her choice of career, as well as her commitment to the 3GNY organization. Elizabeth's interest in our family's history and preserving our grandparents' stories started at a young age. She recognized our family had a unique story, much different from our peers. When she learned about 3GNY, she found not only an opportunity to expound on our family history through education, but a commonality with others, all with important stories that should be preserved. And now I'm so excited to introduce to you my sister, Elizabeth Kamens.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you, David, and thank you to all of those who are joining this evening from near and far. A very special thank you to 3GNY for providing me with the honor and privilege of sharing my grandfather's story with all of you this evening. Normally, I share this story with middle school and high schools throughout New York City. This speaker series has opened up the opportunity for so many people to hear these important stories that must continue to be told. I'm grateful to share this story with you tonight, one that I hope leaves you with knowledge of the past and optimism for the future. Tonight, I am going to share with you the story of my grandfather, Rudolph or Rudy Herz. The story would not be complete without mentioning my grandmother, his wife, Trudy Herz. Both were German Jewish refugees and managed to escape Nazi Germany. Neither were in a concentration camp, but both came to America to start new lives. From a young age, I knew that both my grandparents were different from some of my friends' grandparents. They spoke with German accents, and I vividly remember being at their house, at their kitchen table, and hearing them speak in German when they didn't want my sister and I to know what they were saying. They were very proud Germans for the entirety of their lives. My grandmother was an amazing cook and baker, and culturally really appreciated her German heritage. She made and cooked a lot of German delicacies throughout her whole life. I have fond memories of sharing holidays with them and also going to the synagogue with them, particularly my grandmother in later years. In 6th grade, in my Hebrew school, there was a contest we could enter to share our family history. My mom encouraged me to apply. She told me that she would give me some of the details about my grandfather's past. It was at this time that I learned that my family story was a bit unique. It was also the first time I really started to learn what the Holocaust was, as my public school and really Hebrew school education didn't provide for it in the curriculum. My grandfather died when I was 14, so I am regretful that I didn't have more time to ask more questions. However, I'm obviously very grateful for the time that we did have together. And I'm extremely grateful for 3GNY and the WEDU program, which provided me with the push to curate and culminate all of the materials that my family has from my grandfather. Some of them you will see throughout this presentation. This is my grandfather, Rudy, and my grandmother, Trudy, and my sister and I when we were young. My grandfather was born in Osthofen, Germany in March of 1917. This is a photo of my grandfather and his family. My grandfather, Rudy, is the middle boy featured in the back behind the man that's sitting in the chair. In the chair is my great-grandfather, Felix Herz. To my grandfather's left is his brother, Herbert, who was 2 years older, and to his right is his brother, Lothar, or Larry, who was 2 years younger. Over to the far left is his sister, Erna, who was older than him, and his much younger brother, Werner. And my great-grandmother, Hilda, is pictured on the far right. My grandfather's town, Osthofen, is really bucolic and rural. My great-grandfather, Felix, was a cattle dealer there. There are a lot of vineyards and farms, and it's known as the Rhineland. It's about an hour in today's distance from Frankfurt, which is a large city. My grandfather had a really happy childhood. he was integrated with the non-German individuals in his community, and he had a lot of non-Jewish German friends. He was very close with his siblings and his parents. My grandfather loved to play football, or what we Americans know as soccer, and he was very good at it. He was so proficient that he played in a semi-professional soccer league as he got older. In 1933, my great-grandfather Felix passed away. He was 60 years old when he died, and he died of natural causes. He had married later in life. At that time, my great-grandmother Hilda decided to move the family to a slightly larger town nearby called Worms. This town, Worms, is one of the oldest Jewish towns in Germany, and it has a very famous history. There's an extremely famous synagogue that's located there where the famous Rabbi Rashi studied. This synagogue had been destroyed multiple times over the years in its history, including during the Crusades and again, or the Middle Ages and during the Holocaust. But this was the synagogue where my grandfather and his family prayed. Times were probably tight for my grandfather's family, but when they moved to Worms, my great-grandmother had sold their house in Osthofen to a bank, and they most likely lived on the proceeds from the sale of this house. Also, my grandfather during the 1930s was already nearing his teenage years, along with his two brothers and older sister. So they were helping to contribute to the family financially. My grandfather was studying he was going to work as a hardware apprentice. That was his chosen line of work that he chose at this time, and he didn't go to the university. Perhaps if he had, he would have gone into something like engineering, but he had already begun an apprenticeship during his late teenage years in Germany for hardware. During the 1930s, things were growing increasingly more difficult for the Jews in Germany. These are two photos that I took on a trip to Germany in 2015, and they depict Nuremberg laws that were enacted by the Nazis during the 1930s. Now, both of these are taken in Berlin, and there's a monument there that depicts different laws that went into effect. For example, in August of 1933, Jews were excluded from singing clubs. But as the years went on, things became increasingly worse. And by the time 1940 came around, Jews were only permitted to buy food between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So things were getting increasingly worse for the Jews. But I always tell students when I go into their classrooms that you have to understand that German Jews were very proud, and they considered themselves Germans first and Jews second. A lot of them were veterans and had fought in World War I for Germany. So they never dismissed their German identity or heritage, nor did they think the government would do so either. All Jews were also made to wear this yellow star. This is the actual yellow star that my grandfather was forced to wear. And we actually still have this yellow star. My mom has it and has kept it since my grandfather had it. This is a photograph of that actual yellow star. So during the same time, my grandmother was in Germany as well. And while this is a story about my grandfather, I recently came across a video that I had taken when I was in high school, and I had interviewed my grandmother for a project. And it's quite interesting because a lot of what she comments is relevant to the presentation that I'm sharing with you this evening. So I'm going to share 2 clips, and I just ask that you turn your volumes up because unfortunately the tapes have not been digitized, so the sound is a little bit poor quality.
He went right in with all his buddies and made little laws.
What rights and privileges other than that of the election were taken away from you and your family?
Well, you couldn't go to the movies anymore. You had a curfew at 8 o'clock at night. You were limited on food. It was very limited food. And you couldn't go to the theater. You could not take part in any kind of cultural parties. for plays, for dances, for sports. It all was confined only to the non-Jewish population.
So did this affect any of your school experiences? What kind of school?
No, I went to a private school, Jewish school, and we stayed there through the 4th grade. In the 5th grade, you go into an upper class, like gymnasium, and the girls go to a girls' school, which is already going into higher education before you go to the university.
How did this make you feel when your rights and privileges were taken away from you?
You got used to it. You had no choice. We were scared. We were afraid. Because many times already they started removing all unwanted people in the country, like minorities, like the Roma gypsies, then the homosexuals, the disabled. They were the first ones to be taken away. He wanted to clean up the right.
In September of 1938, my grandfather's sister, Erna, married her husband, Max. In October of 1938, Max left Germany for America. As I mentioned, things were growing increasingly worse for the Jews, and my grandfather's family realized that they needed to get out and that they needed to make provisions in order to do so. However, this was increasingly difficult because countries had quotas and you couldn't just go to another country. You had to have citizens in these other countries account for you, and they had to pay money in order to sponsor you so you wouldn't be a burden to society there. So my grandfather's sister's husband, or my grandfather's brother-in-law, had a relative in America, and he went there and was waiting for my grandfather's sister to meet him shortly thereafter. However, just a month after he left to go to America, Kristallnacht happened. This was on November 9th, 1938. Kristallnacht in English means night of broken glass. This night marked a turning point in the war against the Jews in Germany. While anti-Semitism had been prevalent throughout Europe, this night, Nazi soldiers looted from German businesses, they destroyed Jewish homes, they burned books, synagogues, anything they could do. And the name Night of Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht, came because the following morning, November 10th, all of the streets were littered with glass. This is my grandmother speaking about her experience on Kristallnacht. Again, this is my grandfather's story I'm primarily telling tonight, but I thought it would be meaningful to share her experience and story as well.
No. Nobody thought that he would be a winner, that he would continue on. Everybody thought within a year or two it would disappear.
When did you finally realize that things weren't going to get better in Nazi Germany?
That was the night of the Kristallnacht. That's when it was decided by most of the Jewish population that there is no help anymore. But he took all the young men, any age, on the Kristallnacht and put them in jails. And they were there for about a week, and then they were transported to concentration camps.
So, tell me what happened to your family on the night of Kristallnacht.
Well, on the night of Kristallnacht, we heard the rumor that there is something going to happen, but we weren't sure. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, the Nazis, about 3 Nazi men with guns, came to our door, broke the door, and made my father get him dressed and took him away. We had no idea where. Then 10 minutes later, there came about 15 young men, real young men, between 15 and 30, and they had sticks and all kinds of ammunition to destroy the whole apartment and throw everything out, even out of the window, closets out of the window. And they locked my mother and my sister into a room. When it was all smashed up, then they left. And we knew it was very dangerous.
And the Kristallnacht, that happens all over, everywhere the same.
It happened the same night all over Germany.
So while that was happening to my grandmother in Würzburg, Germany, in Worms, Germany, where my grandfather lived. He was arrested on November 9th, 1938, along with his two brothers, Herbert and Larry, and they were thrown into jail. Fortunately, their sister, Erna, worked for the local city government, and she was able, along with her boss, to secure her brother's release from jail with the promise and understanding essentially from my grandfather and his brothers that they really needed to leave as soon as they could. So at this point, my grandfather's sister's husband, Max, was able to acquire 3 visas through relatives of his family, and they were for Sweden. So there were 3 visas for 3 members of the family to go to Sweden. However, Max still had parents that were living in Worms, and there were 3 visas, but he still had his parents, and there were 5 remaining members of my grandfather's family that needed to be accounted for, him and his 3 brothers and his mother. So his mother had to make a very difficult decision, and she decided, along with Max's parents, to send the 3 older boys because they felt that they were old enough and strong enough, and they would be able to survive whatever journey would entail or would come, with the understanding that whenever they got somewhere that was safe and secure and they were able to provide sponsorship, they would then send for Hilda and Werner. So this was the understanding, and they all thought that this is what would happen. So that's why they chose to send the 3 brothers, even though there were other family members that wanted to get out and that were left behind. My great-grandmother didn't have very much to give her sons when they left, so she gave them a pair of scissors because she felt that this could at least be some sort of weapon in case they needed them. And this is another item that we actually still have. My mother has this pair of scissors that my great-grandmother gave to my grandfather when he departed Germany during this time. Fortunately, they never had to use their scissors. In January of 1939, my grandfather and his brothers were able to acquire passports and visas to travel to Sweden. As you can see, my grandfather's name here is depicted as Rudolph Israel Herz. The Nazis, in order to further delineate all Jewish men, gave them the middle name of Israel, even though that was not their given or born name. And all Jewish female were given the middle name of Sarah, so that when Nazis observed their papers, they could identify them further as Jews. So in January of 1939, my grandfather and his 2 brothers departed Germany for Sweden. They arrived in Sweden sometime in February of 1939. My grandfather's sister Erna stayed behind to help see her brothers off and also to make sure that her mother and her youngest brother were okay. And she left for America in June of 1939. My grandfather and his brothers continually tried to acquire visas to leave, but by the time September came, they still had not acquired visas and were still in Sweden, and World War II had broken out when Germany invaded Poland. And at that point, all the borders were shut, and my grandfather and his brothers were not able to leave. My grandfather and his brothers lived on Max's, my grandmother's sister's brother, or my grandfather's brother-in-law, his relative's land, where they worked the land in exchange for room and board. My grandfather was not able to receive any payment for his work because he was not a Swedish citizen, but he managed to get by and at least had room and board accounted for while he helped with the land that they lived on. My grandfather stayed in Sweden for almost 2 years and finally was able to acquire a visa and travel to Russia, which was his next destination. The war had not broken out in the East at this point. And as you can see by looking through these pages, all of the visas had to be first acquired in Sweden. So once my grandfather and his brothers flew to Russia, and it's unclear how they received the money to do this, but it's plausible that the Swedish relatives they were staying with were financially stable enough to assist them. So once they got to Russia, they took the Trans-Siberian Railroad across Russia, which took approximately 6 weeks. They then went to Korea and then Japan, and finally boarded an ocean liner in Japan, where they set sail for the west coast of the United States. This is my grandfather. He's the tallest brother on the left, and Herbert and Larry on board the ship, the Han Maru, which set sail at some time in the fall of 1940 to Seattle on the west coast of the United States. This trip took about a week and a half, and once my grandfather and his brothers landed in Seattle, they then took a Greyhound bus, which took another week, and they finally landed in New York City, and my grandfather settled in the Bronx. My grandfather settled into life in New York City, and he tried to work and learn English. And he tells a story that one day he was riding the subway when he was sitting down on the subway and someone stole his hat. And he said, okay, this city life isn't for me anymore. And that's when he decided to move to Connecticut, which is where his sister and brother-in-law were living. He got a job working at Yankee Metal, which was a metal factory in Connecticut, and began trying to build a new life for himself in America. Now, during this time and this whole journey to get to the United States, my great-grandmother and her youngest son, Werner, were still in Germany. So at some point, actually in April of 1942, my great-grandmother wrote this postcard, and it was mailed to the relatives in Sweden, which is Ludwig Samuel. And as you can see in the address that's depicted in the postcard on the screen, it's addressed to Sweden, and the date is April 1942. So my great-grandmother wrote this postcard to Sweden, thinking her children were still living there. However, she had no idea that they had left. And I was able to get this postcard translated on the trip that I took to Germany in 2015. We had it in my family, and as you can see, it's very scripty, and it is even hard to read, I think, in German. But one of the tour guides on this trip I took translated it for me and informed me that the way that it's written is in kind of a code, particularly because my great-grandmother probably knew that the Nazis were intercepting the mail that she was sending and writing. So I'm going to read you the translation of this postcard now, and you can listen for what you think might be some of the coded language that she used. My dear all, as you can see, we are in Piaski, Poland, and are still at home. Hope you are fine. We are regarding the conditions just about, and my dear Werner is with me. Would be better to be with the beloved ones. You could improve our situation if you would once make us happy with a parcel. Dear Erna could help, and dear Betty could talk to her. I suggest you better get information about what's allowed to send, and also what you can spare. God willing, it will be in my power to pay you back, and God willing, we will stay healthy. A doctor in Krakow that is not far from here, or another doctor in Poland would be of advantage for us. I would be grateful for about sweetener soup, dried vegetables. Make us happy. You would make us happy with an early sign of life, and dear Betty for me, and dear Werner, your grateful Hilda. So in March of 1942, all of the remaining Jews that were in Worms, Germany, were transported to the Piaski ghetto in Poland. Piaski was one of the first towns in Poland to set up ghettos in the 1940. And at some point after Werner and Hilda were transported to Piaski, they were then transported to Belzec, the extermination camp that's also located in Poland. They were murdered in the gas chambers at some point in the summer of 1942. What's so tragic about this is that my grandfather and his brothers and sister had no idea that this was what was happening to his family that were still in Europe, and Max's family also was murdered in a concentration camp. They tried hard to get my great-grandmother and their younger brother out, but they were unable to. I think also in terms of the code that she was writing in, I mean, it's tragic to know that how dire the situation really was for them. And she's asking for a doctor or some food, but they were probably, in such need of medical attention and in need of food at that time. So it's very tragic to read those words after the fact. But while that was going on, my grandfather was still working in Connecticut. And one day he was at work when a fellow worker heard him speaking with his German accent. Now, at this time, America was at war against Germany in World War II, and it wasn't necessarily common for individuals to be walking around with German accents. So this individual reported my grandfather to the US government as a spy for the Germans. Shortly after that, my grandfather was summoned to Washington, D.C. to meet with officials from the United States government. And during his interview, the officials asked him whether or not he would be willing to fight for the United States Army, thinking that if he was in fact a spy, he wouldn't answer, yes, I would be happy to fight for the United States, because it would make no sense if he was fighting against his people. But in fact, my grandfather answered, yes, I will fight for the United States, and answered in the affirmative, and he was dismissed and sent back to Connecticut. I don't think my grandfather necessarily thought that he was going to get drafted from this encounter, but sure enough, several weeks later, he received a letter in the mail which signified that he was going to be drafted, and he was drafted in December of 1942 into the United States Army. His brother, Larry, also served in the Army, and his brother, Herbert, had poor eyesight and was not drafted. My grandfather was given the option to either fight on the front lines or be a cook during the war, and my grandfather chose to fight on the front lines. He was very angry about what happened to him, and he was angry at the Germans, and he wanted to go get his revenge, and he wanted to go on the front lines and fight, and actively made that choice. So after all of the time that my grandfather spent, almost 2 years, coming to the United States, he was sent back to Europe, specifically Germany, to fight the people that he had tried to leave. These are several pictures of my grandfather in his Army uniform. He entered the 237th Engineering Combat Battalion, and he was part of some very large battles. On June 6th, 1944, he was part of the US forces that landed on the beaches of Normandy during D-Day, the D-Day invasion in France. He was one of the first groups that landed on the shores of Normandy. He said after that men around him were carrying these 60-pound backpacks, and many drowned because of the weight of the packs. He always said that he would get seasick and couldn't even look at small boats or water because of his experiences that June 6, 1944, during D-Day. He was a radio operator as well and overheard a transmission in German. He reported to his superiors due to his skills being able to speak and understand German. The Nazis were planning on attacking his battalion by blowing up a bridge, and his interception of this communication prevented an attack on his battalion, and he received the Bronze Star Medal for this. Recently, we found a letter that he wrote in 1993 to a professor at the University of New Orleans who was doing research on Jewish veterans. And my grandfather wrote in this letter specifically, I was a member of the 237th Engineering Combat Battalion, C Company, 2nd Platoon, 1st Squad, attached to the 4th Infantry Division under General Hodges. We landed on Utah Beach at about 6 a.m. I was a radio operator when we landed. Our mission was to demolish part of the seawall and create an opening for the tanks, which came ashore later. Our unit was also at the St. Lo breakthrough out of Normandy. At the Ruhr River in Germany, I received the Bronze Star. My tour of duty remained with the 237th Engineering till we reached the Elbe River in Germany. My grandfather stayed in Europe for the remainder of the war. This is him pictured on, he's the individual seated on the wall, and he wrote, it feels good to sit even on a German wall. You're Rudy, March 1945. And he would always describe his war experiences. He talked more about his war experiences than anything else. And he would say, when you were alone in the trenches, even mice are your best friend. This is another photo of him. He's pictured in the middle of the two other men, and he wrote, "Two of my buddies in Germany. You're Rudy." My grandfather stayed in Europe for the remainder of the war fighting. He served in North Africa, Belgium, Germany, and France. The war finally ended on September 2nd, 1945. These photos are from letters that he wrote to his sister and signed them, and she had all of these. In the instance when he received the Bronze Star Medal, that incident happened in October of 1944. At the end of the war, he made his way to Worms to pay respects to the cemetery and to also see if he could find any information about his family members. This is a photo of the present-day cemetery in Osthofen, Germany. And I went to this cemetery a little over 2 years ago, and this is exactly how it looks. The headstone on the right is the headstone of Felix Herz, my great-grandfather. And this is the cemetery that my grandfather went to after the war. His service wasn't over yet, but the Army allowed him to take this brief trip to his hometown to see if he could find any information. And while he was there, he happened, just pure happenstance, to run into an old dear friend whose name was Arthur Jacoby, who's featured in the photo on the right. My grandfather is on the left. And it was just pure happenstance that he happened to see this friend of all the days, of all the times after the war. This friend had grown up nearby in a town and had also served in the war for the United States Army and was also a German Jewish refugee. And he was in the intelligence division in the Army. So they had lunch and they had a drink and a toast to old times, and this photo was taken. After the war, my grandfather made his way back to the United States, where he settled in Connecticut and continued to work at the metal factory. Soon thereafter, he met my grandmother, Trudy, in New York City. My grandmother went to Boston when she first came to America, and she had a mutual friend with my grandfather's brother, Larry. So a lot of the German Jewish refugees stuck together socially when they came to the United States. This friend was trying to set up my grandmother and my grandfather's brother, Larry. So she invited my grandmother down. One night, my grandmother took the bus down from Boston, and Larry was supposed to meet my grandmother at the bus, but he was preoccupied or doing something, and he asked my grandfather to meet my grandmother instead, and he did, and the rest is history. They were married in June of 1947, and they relocated, or they moved to Norwalk, Connecticut, which is where they lived most of their lives. My grandparents really tried to have happy, meaningful lives once they moved to Connecticut. They had their first child, Eileen, who was born in 1949, and my mom, Joan, who was born in 1956. These are some photos of my mom and her sister, and my mom's sister when she was a baby, and my mom is in the center, the colored photograph in the center. Sadly, my mom's sister passed away. Eileen passed away in 1974. And in the Jewish tradition, parents name their new children after someone that's passed away, both the initial of the English name and their Hebrew name. So my name, Elizabeth, and my Hebrew name, Hannah, is named for her sister, Eileen. My grandfather was very involved in his synagogue life. He was also very involved in the Jewish war veterans in his area in Connecticut. He went into hardware, ultimately, after leaving the metal factory at some point, and he became a partner in a hardware store that was located in Stamford, Connecticut, where he worked until his retirement much later. After the war, my grandfather had family that was really spread all over. several of his immediate relatives, like his mother's sister, went to South America, and then he had other relatives that went to Israel. And I know my mom always said that there was a lot of guilt between the brothers and their sister Erna, because they weren't able to ultimately save their mother and youngest brother. However, there were other relatives that did escape and go to these other places like South America and Israel. So there was also a bit of animosity because no one else really tried to save Hilda or Werner either. So obviously these were very layered, complex situations and emotions, but there was also a lot of guilt because they just ultimately weren't able to save them. However, my grandfather's sister became like a mother figure to the three brothers, and they remained very, very close. My grandfather's sister and his older brother, Herbert, both lived in Norwalk, Connecticut as well. So the picture on the left that says January 1960 is my grandfather, grandmother, my mom and her sister, Eileen, and my grandfather's brother, Herbert, and his wife, Irma, who is also a German Jewish refugee. The picture on the right is his sister, Erna, and her husband's 25th wedding anniversary. So my mom always talks about how there was a lot of lovely family gatherings and they saw a lot of family. And she said that everyone was always speaking German, but that the families were very close. And especially because so many lived in such a small town together and all belonged to the same synagogue. So they saw each other quite frequently. This is a photo of me as a baby with my grandparents and also at my bat mitzvah. I was the first child for my grandparents, so I had a first grandchild, and I had a very special relationship with them. Particularly, they had a very strong belief still in Judaism throughout all of their lives, despite everything that they had been through and after losing a child. So the fact that they could be with me when I celebrated my bat mitzvah, when I turned 13, was a very special experience and memory for me. They were also both ardent Zionists and really believed and loved Israel. They traveled to Israel once during their lives, and my grandmother always spoke so fondly about Israel and was such a huge proponent of the state of Israel and the freedoms that it allowed. When my grandfather retired from his hardware store, my grandparents relocated to Pennsylvania, where I grew up. So they lived very close by and I saw them all of the time, which was very special. And I'm very fortunate for that. My grandparents traveled back to Germany once in August of 1967. And pictured on the left is the famous synagogue that I had mentioned was famous in Worms. And on the right is actually a modern day photo of my mom, sister, and I on the trip that we took there in June of 2018. And to bring things full circle, in my mom's hand, she's holding the photo of my grandparents on the left. My grandparents really wanted to go back to Germany and they went back this one time. My grandfather was still very supportive of German products and German people, and they had a really positive experience when they made this trip back. My grandmother kept a journal on her trip, and it was extremely detailed. I'm going to read a brief passage of this journal entry that she took because I think it shows, excuse me, I have a siren in the background, New York City, if you can hear that. But I'm going to read this brief passage now that my grandmother kept from her trip to Germany in 1967. After we settled in, we started out looking for the synagogue. To Rudy, this was really some experience. We asked a man on the street who took care of the synagogue, and we were standing right in front of the ancient house, 18 Judengasse, where Fräulein Hills lives. She must have heard the conversation on the street and came running, and one look at Rudy and vice versa, both were very touched at this reunion, not having seen each other for 22 years. She took us all around the famous landmark of this 1,000-year-old synagogue, which was destroyed in 1938 by Hitler and his henchmen. It had been completely rebuilt after earlier plans were found. Even the Rashi Shul and the natural women's bath are on exhibit. It is the most significant synagogue I have ever seen, and we signed the guest book, which has names of visitors from all over the world. School groups are brought there from all over Europe. Afterwards, we started for Osthofen, There, we visited the cemetery. In order to get in, we climbed over the fence. The mud was awful, but the cemetery had been cleaned up. Back to the Volksbank, the former house of the Herz family, and here we talked for 2 hours with the manager. He was so interested to see Rudy and wouldn't let us go. Then we went to see another friend at the hotel. At 8 p.m., we went to pick up Fräulein Hills, but to our surprise, she had set a table for dinner for us with all kinds of delicacies, and to top it all, champagne. The evening was really entertaining, and after our fill, quite late, we returned to the hotel. In the morning, we took pictures and one more tour of the synagogue. Fräulein Hills greeted us with a bouquet of carnations, cookies, and wine. She really made our visit so enjoyable, and we felt quite sad when it was time to say goodbye. I think what is so remarkable about this experience and my grandmother's journal entry is that here, these individuals were not Jewish, they were Germans. It was only 22 years after the war, after the Holocaust, and these individuals were so excited to see my grandparents and my grandfather. And I think that's why my grandfather always said, not all Germans were bad. He was able to discern that some are, and there was a lot of good ones too. He bought a Volkswagen at one point in his life. And a lot of American Jews, went through times when they wouldn't even support Germany and German products. But here he was, participating in German commerce and buying German goods. These photos show essentially modern day Worms. So during the 1980s, my grandfather was very involved in a memorial committee for the Jews that were murdered in his town in Worms, and specifically for a memorial to go up in the famous synagogue. So on the right are a list of names. As you can see, Herz is a very common German name. And you can see that Hilda and Werner are listed. And this photo was taken from one of my trips to Germany. And my grandfather was really active in trying to get this memorial built. And Jews that had relocated to all over the world joined him. And it was part of a very big effort and community. And on the left, you'll see 2 gold markers in the ground. And these are called Stolpersteins. These are, in English, it's stumbling blocks, and they're located all throughout Germany, in all different towns, cities, and it's a type of memorial that the Germans have put in that depict the name, deportation date, and date of death of individuals that were murdered during the Holocaust, all Germans. And specifically, they're placed in front of where the individual was last living. So these are the 2 stones for Hilda and for Werner, and they were just put in 2018. There's a really wonderful organization that is located in Worms and Osthofen, and they call themselves the 9th of November Committee, being Kristallnacht. They had gotten in touch with my family when they were trying to get more information as they were going to be enacting or putting these blocks into the ground in 2018. And when we went on the trip earlier that year, we actually were able to meet a lot of members of this committee. And they had a memorial service when they put these stones into the ground later on that year. These are my grandparents in 1974, and it's kind of, I picture this as like a really vibrant time in their lives when they were able to travel and, they had a lot of friends and just really full lives. But I'd also like to note that, as I mentioned before, my grandparents were very proud of their German heritage. But that being said, I think a lot of people are quick to say, why didn't more people speak up? Why didn't more Germans speak up and protect the Jews and everything that happened? And particularly seeing the climate of America right now, I think it's important to note that things aren't always so easy or how they seem. And I think this speaks particular resonance today. I have a letter that he wrote to a book editor in 1997, which I think does a really good job of explaining what the German climate was like in the 1930s. He wrote, "Dear Sir, reading your book review in the Jewish Exponent of October 1997, Nazi Germany and the Jews, I felt compelled to write you my opinion. I'm a German Jew born in 1917 in Germany. Most of your facts are correct, but what you don't understand is the dictatorship of Hitler and control over the German people. There was always anti-Semitism in Germany, as there is anti-Semitism in America. To live in police state defies comprehension. Each and every German citizen was powerless, and they lived in constant fear. No one could voice their opinion. The Nazis and Gestapo had complete control of everyday life. As I was growing up, I had many German friends, but when Hitler came to power, they were afraid of their own lives. The feared Gestapo was everywhere, in the schools, in universities, churches. Parents could not speak in front of their children. These are the real facts of everyday life under Nazi terror. Respectfully yours, Rudolph Herz. I'm going to leave with this last photo, which is really how I remember my grandparents. And I remember the day that this photograph was taken. It was the summer, and we had gone over to my grandparents for lunch because my grandmother had some cousins who were visiting from England. And I remember before we left, we took this photo on their driveway. So I think, my grandfather's story has a lot of resonance today, because not only are we gearing up for a very divisive election next week, and the climate of this country is so erratic and divisive, but we're also currently in the middle of a global pandemic, and everyone's lives have been affected, whether it's children in schooling, people in jobs, unemployment, people's health is affected as well. And I think it's important to realize that people in our past, my grandfather and so many others, did go through the unfathomable and the unthinkable, and they did make it through. And I hope that that story gives you some glimmer of optimism and hope that there is an end, there will be an end, and a better tomorrow. And America is a place that both my grandparents wanted to go. They saw it as a melting pot, even back when they came here, and it was a place of freedom. My grandfather always said, at the end of the day, all you have is your character. And he would always say that when, someone maybe was holding a grudge or someone was concerned with material goods. And he would say, look, at the end of the day, all it matters is the type of person that you are. And you don't know what kind of story everyone has. Looking at my grandparents in this picture, you wouldn't know what they had gone through or what they had lost or the challenges they faced. And that goes for everyone. Just by looking at someone, you don't necessarily know what they've gone through. And it's so important to treat people with kindness and respect, because everyone does have a story, and you just don't know what that story is unless you ask. So with that, thank you for listening. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for gifting us with your family story. We're now going to open it up for questions. If you have a question for Elizabeth, please type it into the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to it. Due to the high volume of questions we typically receive, we will not be able to answer every single one, but if you have any question that's not addressed tonight, please email info@3gnewyork.org, and we will relay it to Elizabeth. Thank you for understanding. I'll start with the first question, and that is, how did your grandfather feel to fight the Germans when he was a proud German himself?
So I think he was very adamant about fighting and returning to Germany. Granted, the journey to get to the United States was so long and so difficult, but I think he was really angry at what his family was put through, and he did want revenge in a way. He had vengeance, and he was willing to go to the front lines, which he proved by being in, a combat unit and being in these large battles. So I think, I think he was proud and ready to fight for the United States.
Okay, so another question is, has Elizabeth spoken about this story to students or other places, and what has your experience been like?
So yes, I've spoken with students in schools, and it's been a very positive experience. I think for both the teachers and the students, I think I think the Holocaust curriculum in schools is getting better. And I think through the WEDU program and through 3GNY, we're able to add another element into the schools through these very interactive and personal presentations. I mean, I wish someone had come to my public school and given this presentation. I think they're really informative, and the experiences have been very positive. I've gotten so many thank you notes from classrooms, and the thank you notes are so detailed, and students really are listening to what you're saying.
All right, here's one. When did your grandfather learn that his mother and brother were killed in the concentration camp? And was he in the military in Germany at that point?
That's actually a very good question. And I don't think I have the answer to that. It's an excellent question. I know it was quite a while, I will say, before they realized that they were taken to Belzec, the extermination camp, and murdered in the gas chambers. And I also know that the Jews of the town of Worms put together a very comprehensive book of all of the Jews in the town and what happened to them and where they went. And it's extremely detailed, but that book wasn't completed until like the 1980s. So I do think it took a while to acquire some of that information. I'm not sure if he found out about that information when he was still in Germany, though.
Okay, another question is, in what ways do you feel your grandfather's experience inform your current work? And then somebody else asked, how it has shaped you as a person today, his experiences. So if you want to combine those two.
Sure. So I think my work, I work in the Bronx and I deal with a lot of immigrants. And I think knowing that my grandparents were immigrants and it was really hard for them to get jobs and to learn English, and they had to start all over. My grandmother's father, or excuse me, my great grandfather, from my grandmother, he was an educated man in Germany, and he came to America and had to start over, and he wasn't ever able to really move on with his life because he was in his 50s and wasn't able to get a job and make any money anymore. So I think in terms of dealing with certain people like immigrants, I think that's definitely shaped how I want to help them, and I see how challenging it is. And I also see that, it's important to stick up for those who don't have a voice, which is, one of the reasons that lured me into the career, the path that I now have. And the second part was
how it shaped your experiences and who you are today.
Well, my grandparents were extremely caring, giving people, and I think their whole outlook on life, it's hard, but I try to model, to be positive and optimistic. And again, it's hard, it's a struggle, but that's what they did, and they lost so much. So I think just trying to, channel their attitudes and really having them as an inspiration of that outlook and attitude, and also just to try to be a good person, and that's important.
So I just wanted to say there is a survivor who's on here, Ralph, and he said he's an 86-year-old German Jewish survivor from Germany in 1938 after Kristallnacht, and just wanted to know you did a good job.
Oh, thank you very much.
The next question will be, when Rudy was traveling in Germany after the war, when did he finally realize his mother and brother had been killed?
So that's a very good question. I don't know if he realized immediately. I do know that the family had been relocated in Worms, so I don't think their house was there anymore or any of their belongings were there anymore. And I know at some point the Germans had relocated all of the Jews within Worms to somewhere else within Worms, I think. So I'm not sure if he found out when he was traveling in Germany or if it was later on. Again, the information was still kind of slowly coming out after the war. So he might have, thought that they had died, but he might not have known when or how or where.
Okay, another question is, did your grandparents share their story with their children as they grew up?
So that's a very good question, because I've been asking my mom a lot of questions, and I have been since I did the WEDU training a few years ago, and even recently while I was preparing for this today. So she knew certain things, but she didn't know a lot of others. And when I mentioned in the beginning, when I was in 6th grade and I entered this contest, I remember her calling my grandfather and getting all of the facts, and then I like hand wrote the whole story. So she knew things, but they didn't really talk about it a lot. Like, I don't think they were talking about Kristallnacht and, everything, and like leaving, and how things were so bad for the Jews before, and how, the laws were getting stricter and their rights were being taken away. I don't think that they discussed that. But my grandfather was very close with a lot of his army buddies, army friends, and he stayed in touch with a lot of them. So I know that that was an important part of his life, and he would travel and see them and get together. So I think he did speak a bit more about his war experiences than per se the situation in Germany. However, I will say that they talked a lot about Germany. Like, my grandmother and grandfather would talk about where they were from and their land, and like the type of place that it was, and the landscape and the scenery, and that kind of thing.
How did you feel as a Jew returning to Germany? Was any part of the experience, did you feel any anti-Semitism?
So I did not. I've been there twice now, all in recent, like the past 5 years. I had very positive experiences both times. I was a little bit nervous to go the first time. I remember my dad had gone on business trips and said, everyone like looks Aryan, and I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, I'm going to stand out so much. But the first time I went, it was on an organized trip through a organization called Germany Close Up, which subsidizes American Jews to go to Germany and travel around. It was amazing. The individuals who led the trip were so supportive and interesting. And I think a lot of them are still wrestling with questions from their past, because a lot of their grandfathers, maybe not so much fathers anymore, but grandfathers were Nazis. So they were very open about it. And I think the younger generations have really tried to change. Granted, it's not across the board. Anti-Semitism is still very prevalent in Europe and Germany. But the people that I encountered were really remarkable. And the second trip that I went was actually, a book was being written about a few small towns that were near my grandfather's, where he grew up, not including my grandfather's. And the photo that I featured with my grandfather and the friend Arthur Jacoby was being featured in this book. So my family was invited for this book launch in Germany 2 years ago. So this was also an extremely warm reception. We visited a variety of towns and primarily met with there was really no Jews except for the people that were invited to go on this tour and for the book launch. So the people that we met really were trying to, they really took a lot of interest in the history of the Jews of their town. And they were really the most exceptional, nice people. So I didn't experience any, but, I think it might've been my experience. I think things have changed over time as well.
Okay, and now I think this might be the last question, but when speaking in schools, what is the most unique question a student has asked you?
So one student asked me, which I thought was interesting, and also, we're speaking in city schools. It wasn't so much of a question, but it was a statement that he was so surprised that my grandfather was noticed for speaking with a German accent. Because today, America is so diverse. New York City public schools are so diverse. And I think he was just so surprised that my grandfather would have been reported as a spy for just having an accent. And, I explained to him that in the early 1940s, we were at war. America was, even though it's always, been a melting pot, it was much more homogeneous, and there wasn't as much diversity and individuals who had settled here from all over. So I think he kind of understood that. But I really remember this student and just being so interested by his statement, because he's he's young and he's from a different time where he doesn't know the United States to be what it was once before. So that was very interesting. And, you know, people will ask like questions about a lot about the war, I would say. And like one student asked once, like if my grandfather ever had to use the scissors that his mother gave him. So now I just incorporate that in my presentation that he did not.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, but if you have any questions we haven't gotten to, once again, please email info@3gnewyork.org. Elizabeth, thank you for speaking tonight and for sharing your grandfather's story. And Lindsay, thank you for joining us and for being part of our program. And thanks again to all you viewers, wherever you may be located, for joining us. We're glad you took the time to hear Elizabeth speak words that must never be forgotten. If you haven't yet made a gift to support our educational programs, we hope you'll consider making one now. Please refer to the chat for ways you can donate. Also, if you have connections with educators who may want our speakers to present to their classes, please be in touch with us. We hope to see you again soon. We have some great virtual events coming up, including more WEDU Wednesdays. On Wednesday, November 11th, Yoni Litwak will share The Quest for a Hidden Torah. He will talk about his trip to Poland to find a Torah his grandfather hid when the Nazis invaded Poland. We can't wait to hear this one. Then, on Wednesday, December 9th, Anna Schumann will share her family story. We'll be sending out an email tomorrow with details and registration links for these events, as well as a recording of tonight's program. You can also check out our past WEDU Wednesday speakers on 3GNY's YouTube channel. We encourage you to share our work with friends and family so we can ensure these stories are reaching as many people as possible. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your evening to be with us. Have a great night.